Welcome to the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Delphine Milo, Managing Director of the GBTA Foundation, and I'll be your host for today's episode of the Carbon Compass, a special subseries of the Business of Travel podcast focused on sustainability and planet-related conversations. Together, we'll explore, discuss, and demystify the world of sustainability in business travel. Today, I'm excited to welcome two very special guests from our GBTA Foundation Sustainability Leadership Council. Nora Lovell-Marchand, VP for Global Sustainability at American Express Global Business Travel. Hi, Nora. And Paige Moats, Chief Compliance and Sustainability Officer at Hertz. Hi, Paige. Welcome, ladies. Today, we're going to talk about business travel in the climate era, which was the topic of the event we just hosted during Climate Week in New York. I hope you have some energy left after a week of intense discussion and engagement in New York City. And actually, before we jump into the topic for the event and the creative tensions that we explored all together, Paige, I know that you've been attending many Climate Weeks over the years. Could I please ask you to explain to our audience what this event, or should I say these events, are about, and why is it important to be there in person?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to connect on this podcast with yourself and Nora. Really happy to be here. Yes, the interesting thing about Climate Week is it's not like one big conference. That's what we're used to. But it's a series of mini sessions, mini conferences, many connections, many gatherings across the city of New York, really Manhattan, and bringing together this amazing mixture of chief sustainability officers and their teams, consulting firms, advisors, individuals from government, individuals from NGOs, individuals from associations, and everything in between to come together and really talk about the problem of climate change, what solutions might be out there that we need to think up and develop or accelerate, and how do we invigorate and excite and bring more enthusiasm to get things done bigger and faster. And being together is just an energy that you cannot replace. It really allows you to have those small conversations as well as big ones. It really invigorates everyone that is able to be together, but it also, I believe, allows you to walk away with actionable items to bring back to your own organization or the groups that you're working with day in, day out to try to, make the change that we're trying to envision for the future. So it's a wonderful week every week. It's exhausting. You have to wear tennis shoes everywhere you go, but it's well worth it.
I've taken your tip on the tennis shoes, Paige. I was wearing them this week. And when you talk about all of these stakeholders coming together, it's also very interesting that Climate Week is happening at the same time as the United Nations General Assembly. So in addition to all of the business and sustainability leaders, a number of political leaders are also in town, and we do need them to accelerate change and work together with businesses to drive change. So thank you, Paige. I was wondering, so Nora, you were also part of the events and this week. Did you have the same experience? And I was also curious to know, Nora, with the topic this year being it's time to really highlight the urgency of climate action. Where do you feel that our industry stands on the road to net zero?
Yeah, Delphine, thank you so much for hosting this podcast. It's great to be here, especially after such a busy week or during a busy week. But yes, the theme of this Climate Week was It's Time. And that is a theme that was repeated throughout the entire week at every single event, because indeed, this is the decade of delivery. And more so, we're in the middle of the decade of delivery. So we really need to prove that action is being taken now and meaning, steel in the ground and real infrastructure development with respect to the deep decarbonization technologies that are needed in order to tackle climate change. And that needs to happen right now, just from a climate science perspective, because these are not just, rough timelines. From a climate science perspective, what the Paris Agreement says is that we need to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And in order to be on that trajectory, it means we need to halve emissions by about 2030. And that means we basically need to peak emissions in 2025-ish. So this next year is really important. And I think that's why it was exactly the right time to have that sort of mantra. And people are taking it seriously. Just like Paige said, there's a huge, vast array of stakeholders that are here, public sector, private sector, and for everyone to be on the same page and agree on that one thing, I think is progress unto itself. So where is our industry on that roadmap? Listen, we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think that this benchmarking exercise, for example, that GBTA has recently put out, will help everybody understand where we are on that roadmap.
Yeah. And so that interim milestone that 2030 is about. So you mentioned reducing emissions in half, and we know that this is, incredibly difficult from the perspective of the transport sector and aviation. So what keeps you optimistic when we look at, the longer term goal of 2050 by net zero by 2050?
I mean, what keeps me optimistic? This is sort of an often quoted, the future in 5 to 10 years is much easier to predict than the future in the next 1 to 2 years. So while there's a lot of focus on the upcoming elections, for example, regardless of what happens, we know the trajectory that the world is headed in, and that's renewable energy being cheaper and therefore having massive scaling of renewable energy. Yes, there's been a downturn with respect to electric vehicles that Paige can speak to extensively, but electric vehicles are not going away. They are in fact increasing regardless of the supply chain issues that have sort of been impacting the industry for the last bit of short period of time. When it comes to, biofuels and electrification of everything, really, that trajectory is only going in one direction. So that's what keeps me optimistic, is that we can see the trends and they're all going in the right direction. We just have to accelerate every single one of those trends as quickly as possible, because indeed it is time.
And so talking about, this transformation and these trends and the new reality we are in, which is the climate era and business travel in the climate era. So during the event we hosted together during Climate Week, we took our audience through a number of creative tensions, which really reflect the competing demands of customers, the needs we're facing. And I would really like to take you through some of the discussions we had to just, bring it to our listeners and the wider audience. So one of the first questions that we went through is about climate solutions and whether they should focus on offering the biggest impact or the fastest impact. So let's start with you, Nora, because this echoes some of the comments you just made. So what side would you pick, if you were to pick one? So is it about the biggest impact or the fastest impact when we look at climate solutions?
Yeah, these tensions, Delphine, are really a fun way to engage in conversation, and it's hard to pick one because, of course, the answer is both. But if forced to choose, I would pick the fastest. And the reason for that, again, to go back to climate science, our atmosphere is a sink, and therefore carbon emissions accumulate in our atmosphere. So carbon that is emitted today is actually worse than carbon that is emitted tomorrow because it just sits there and it grows over time. The more carbon you emit, it just stays there. carbon can stay in our atmosphere for, 100 or by some measurements up to 3,000 years. So that's indeed why we have to move so much faster when it comes to climate change, really as fast as possible, because the problem gets worse over time. And that's why, it's not just about carbon, but there was a lot of talk this week and increased awareness, I think, with respect to contrails, for example, which are another climate impact affecting the aviation sector. There was also, a lot of focus this week with respect to methane emissions, for example. So just thinking beyond carbon because they have a higher global warming potential even compared to carbon. So I'd have to pick fastest because we need to solve for this as quickly as possible. And that's why we can't just wait. You'll hear people say, oh, well, the price of this decarbonization solution is too expensive, so I'm just going to wait for the price to come down. And we can't do that because we do not have the luxury of time.
Yeah. And so I remember that during that exercise, and it was interesting because we were all like-minded stakeholders in the room, believing that, success and prosperity of the global business travel industry relies on embedding sustainability in everything we do. And I remember the room was split, it was, yes, it's exactly what you explained in terms of why we need urgent, fast action. But there were also a lot of stakeholders in the room sitting on the side of the biggest impact. Paige, what side of the room did you pick and why?
Well, I picked the biggest, but I must admit, Nora, her perspectives are very compelling and convincing. And I'm with Nora with her first statement, which is the truth is you want to do both, right? You want to have enough time to do things that have significant impact while you're not slowing down low-hanging fruit or getting things moving now. We can't be stuck. So to me, it's a little bit of both, but I did stand on the biggest impact side. There were some reasons for that. It was primarily because there is limited money, there is limited resources to go get things done. And I have tended to work with organizations that, when I'm asking for the funds or I'm asking for the resources or I'm asking to sign off on my plan, I want to ensure that there is, significant outputs and results that can drive why those are the things that I'm prioritizing. So that was my reason, but I completely agree with everything Nora said as well. All of that is true.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, we need this big impact as fast as possible. So that's probably why that was clearly not a right answer there. But yeah, clearly focusing on both the speed and the scale is critical. Let's now explore the drivers for change, because again, sitting in a lot of the events with stakeholders this week, it was about making a business case for sustainability. We're still there, and I mean it's the way we're gonna get buy-in from senior executives to get the investments needed and then the business model transformations. So we talked about these drivers for change and what's the most powerful. So Paige, the question we asked to the audience was, what is the most powerful driver of change? Is it your bottom line or your reputation? What do you think?
This was another one that had really significant dividing lines and a lot of passion around why people chose which side. My reason for picking bottom line was not that reputation is not important. It's simply because I've had two different organizations now in which I have been working really hard to embed operational management of sustainability into the company, because my experience is that when it is integrated into the broader operations, into the broader product considerations, when there is an accountability structure in the company that also includes this, and it's not feeling like it's something kind of over here to the right, then it allows for a lot more synergy, a lot more adoption and agreement by senior leadership. And that's where I find we tend to find the dollars, we tend to find the resources, because you can prove more connection to the business. And when it's connected to the business, in my experience, it moves faster, you get the money, and you can make a quicker change. So that's why I sat on that side, but there are a lot of good reasons why reputation is a smart one. My perspective is if you integrate it as a key part of the business, then by definition, it's connected to your brand, and that will enhance your reputation, and your broader stakeholder group will see the output as being holistically sustainable.
Yeah. No, and it's definitely part of building the case. We often talk about the 3 Ps of people, planet, and prosperity, or people, planet, and profit. So certainly the bottom line has to be part of the equation. Nora, any extra insights or views from your standpoint?
Yeah, I definitely always agree with Paige. And I think Paige is right with respect to, the bottom line, of course, is imperative in any company, and you have to embed sustainability into the business. It can't be something that sits off to the side. But I would maybe pick reputation for this question or this tension, because unique to our industry, especially, business travel was impacted by the pandemic, arguably, more than most other industries and most other sectors. And I do think that the pandemic was also a time for organizations to embed sustainability even further within their business models. It was a reckoning moment for our industry, frankly. And those companies that sort of made good decisions with respect to sustainability at a really hard time from a financial perspective, I think that sort of proved why that's true. I hear the phrase sometimes, you have to be in the black to be in the green. And I hate that mantra, because I don't think it's true. And especially for our industry, the pandemic proved that that was not true, because our industry doubled down on sustainability when really we were at a time of great financial distress. We've come out the other side, and reputation is everything. So those companies that really invested in sustainability did so because they had a long-term view. And that's what reputation is all about.
Yeah, no, that's a very good perspective. And it's true that we often reflect on the very difficult years that the business travel industry faced during the pandemic as actually a time of reflection, when the commitment and all of the industry rallied together to really double down on sustainability and climate action. So, we talked about the drivers, but when we look at the ways of impacting change, one of the questions that we had was about, whether we think we can reach our climate action goals by focusing on what we can control or what we can influence. Nora, what do you think?
Despite being a control freak, admittedly, I would have to pick influence. And the reason I say that for Climate Week, really a highlight was being able to see Jane Goodall speak. She's just a celebrity sort of in the sustainability world, and her research on chimpanzees, for example. And it's her 90th birthday. And she said, I'd rather be in the forest on my 90th birthday than here in the middle of New York City. But she was raising money for her foundation, dedicated to research for chimpanzees. Anyway, long story short, her birthday wish was that we all vote. And that, I think, was really compelling. So when you think about, what you can control versus what you can influence, I would just hold up, the birthday wish of Jane Goodall. And that's how we can sort of influence and make the world a better place and have a lasting legacy.
Yeah. Now, and I think, we can relate with GBTA and the foundation and all of the leaders, sustainability leaders we have around the table, the voice, the common voice we can have in terms of inspiring others and influencing others in terms of, making these changes that are not easy. We feel it also in our advocacy work, in a lot of the value chain discussions we're having. We're talking a lot about, this demand signal that the industry can send. It's incredibly important to look at this influencing power. Indeed, demand from customers versus the suppliers that can see that there's then this business case to make these transformations is very important. So Paige, what do you think? Are you in team influence or team control?
I am team influence. Nora and I are aligned. I think also the spirit of the GHG protocol, especially in scope 3, is all about influence, right? There's a reason why there's double counting, in some cases more than double. It's because we all depend on each other. And I think the more we can, even though sometimes it's tough because it's the hardest part about the job, knowing that you've got to push a rock up a hill on something you don't control, it does reinforce that the only way to tackle climate change is to all come together. It isn't a siloed activity. It is a team sport. So I think, those of us in sustainability have, at least over time, finely tuned our influencing skills, because it's a critical part of the job, not only in our own company, but with our partners, with our customers, with our suppliers, and all of the ecosystem. So I'm team influence.
Okay. And I love this. Sustainability is a team sport. So you both covered the fact that, we are at a turning point and that we need to make more progress at a bigger scale and faster. So Paige, do you think we need stronger commitments or better ideas?
So it's interesting. I've thought more about this question since the event. The night of the event, I was team better ideas. Here's the reason. A lot of companies have commitments. They have short-term goals, they have net zero goals. They're all very ambitious because the majority are attempting to do a 1.5 degree transition, and there's a lot of focus on that. So I think some of the spirit of the theme of Climate Week this week, and let's be honest, for the past several years, has been, it's time to take action. So I was leveraging the language of, we have a lot of commitments, but we need more ways to actually achieve action and progress. So better ideas in my mind on the event night was really about, how do we find better partnerships, better ways to catalyze engagement, not just net new ideas. But the more I think about it, I haven't necessarily switched over to stronger commitments, but I've thought about the word commitment on a broader scale. For example, there are really good ideas that exist today. It's hard to get people to commit to actioning on those ideas, right? It's not just about goals, but there are great solutions that are just waiting to be funded or waiting for, uptake commitments. So I'm starting to think of the commitment conversation more than goals, but more committing to new innovations that are already ready to go. We just need to catalyze them. So I'm a little bit on the fence on exactly where I stand now, but that's how my brain works.
Yeah, no, and it relates to another tension we had about, do we need, more will and more money? But really what you're trying to convey here is that there are commitments and there are ideas, but we just need to bring them to the next stage. And maybe, it will take better ideas to execute on the commitments, or stronger commitments to make these ideas work. So again, there was no right or wrong. Okay, so Nora, Paige, just here is the last one to both of you. I have to speak about the acceleration challenge that GBTA just launched. And Nora, you briefly mentioned it. So we are still in the process of collecting company submissions, and really the goal is to assess where our industry stands on the integration of sustainable business travel practices. So in your view, reflecting on this, what do you see as the biggest opportunity to accelerate climate action in business travel today? So Nora, can I start with you?
Yeah, I think actually just going back to the last question and now combining it with the acceleration challenge, I would be in the camp of stronger commitments because we actually already have all the technologies that are needed in order to achieve net zero from a global perspective. So, in terms of the acceleration challenge, it's invaluable for our industry to understand from a benchmarking perspective, sort of where you sit on the map. Does your company have a commitment? Is it strong enough? Does it align with your peers? So the acceleration challenge will be invaluable. And then also, just taking it one step further, the acceleration challenge will accelerate doubling down investments in those technologies that already exist. We can achieve net zero with the technologies that exist today. We don't need to necessarily, break the laws of physics in order to achieve net zero. We have renewable energy. We just need to scale it at unicorn levels. For the first time in our lives, really, we have, a vehicle, an electric vehicle that is, from a product perspective, on par with internal combustion engines. They just cost a bit more. From a fuel perspective, we have jet fuel that comes from sustainable sources. From a technology perspective, we have the tools, and the acceleration challenge will enable us to invest within our industry in those technologies and double down on the commitments that we already have instead of hoping that some, salvation will come in the future. We just need to, double down on what is available today because we have the tools.
Thank you, Nora. Paige?
Again, I agree with Nora. That's kind of where I was going when I said I've, since the event, switched my perspective because I agree. There's already really good ideas. There's already really good technologies. They just need to be scaled. They just need to be, and in some cases, myths to be busted, right? There's assumptions about some of these solutions that require some change, and people are naturally fearful of change. And so we like to sit in our corner and say, no, 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 that confuses me. I don't understand it. And therefore I don't want to lean into it. And I think one of the things that can help us accelerate climate action in business travel is to ensure everybody knows the real truth about these solutions, the real opportunity about the solutions, how they don't have to pick all of them, pick one, right? Make some progress, make some move, get off of center. And I think that will be a great way to start showing progress as a collective industry. And once you see progress, it infuses excitement that you can do more, and then you can take the second step. So, whether that's leaning in more deeply to SAF or, figuring out how to get your employees more comfortable with an EV when you're not going 400 miles in the woods, how do we get myths busted? How do we get pathways to change? And I think that's why we're all working together.
I really love the way both of you captured the essence of the challenge. And indeed, it's a pathway, it's solutions and opportunities, all plural. And with the challenge, we are capturing, where we can, start, advance, and lead practices across a wide categories of action levers. It's about better travel decisions. It's about suppliers' engagement, emissions tracking, measurement, investments in decarbonization solutions. And indeed, it's the exact pathway or strategy will depend on every company's culture, size, geographies, but we're really capturing it all in this pathway. So thank you again, Nora and Paige, for sharing your insights with our listeners today after an intense week at Climate Week New York City, and also for your leadership all year round to support our GBTA sustainability initiative and help drive the industry forward on climate action. We really appreciate you and all of your thought leadership and time investment in the initiative. Also, since we mentioned our acceleration challenge, I just want to remind all of our listeners that there's a deadline for collecting all of the company submissions, and it's coming soon. It's the 15th of October. So please make sure that you enter the challenge. It starts with a free maturity assessment. It's accessible to everyone. Again, there are no right or wrong answers. It's just about logging where you stand. And if you're only just starting, it's absolutely fine. So yeah, hope to get many companies across the globe to participate. So you've been listening to the Carbon Compass, a special sub-series of the Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about the GBTA Foundation and its work, visit gbtafoundation.org. And please be sure to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, thank you for listening.